Hello and welcome along to the first of the 2015 video blogs from ICT. My name is Dave Robson. I am Head of Research and Development here at ICT, and I'm here once again with Jonathan Bowdler.
Hello.
Jonathan is UK Head of Governance, Risk and Compliance, and we're going to talk to you today briefly in time-honoured tradition at this time of year with some predictions for 2015. So I think we've got a top 5 from Jonathan here today. So Jonathan, if you want to take it away with number 1.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave. Delighted I was to be asked to make predictions for the coming year in our wonderful predictable area of regulatory compliance. So first of all, I've actually started with a bit of a banker. I've gone for the increasing focus on culture and behaviours, particularly from the UK regulator, the FCA. They've been talking a good game for the last couple of years now since they've been in existence. And again, what we're now beginning to see, particularly at the beginning of December in a couple of speeches that both Martin Wheatley and the head of enforcement made, they are now really beginning to set the agenda for having to demonstrate how businesses are actually going about bringing these changes in culture, changes in behaviour about. And we can expect to see quite a lot, I think, in this year's risk outlook, which will be published shortly, and then in their business plan, which is due out sometime in March if it follows the same pattern as previous years. So for those involved in governance, risk and compliance in the UK, I think this is really going to be the year of focus on cultural change and behavioural change that we'll see from the UK regulators.
Okay, I think that's probably fair to say. We'll see that filtering out across the rest of the world as well, the increased focus on culture and governance. And at number 2, Jonathan, we've got insider trading.
Yeah, now this one's based on a specific incident that occurred just before Christmas. In New York, the New York State regulator has been very hot, post sort of credit crisis, last 5 or 6 years, on carrying out prosecutions around insider dealing cases. And there's been quite a few quite high-level significant cases. Now, on I think it was December the 12th this year, one of those high-profile cases was actually overruled by the Federal Court of Appeal. Now, the consequences of that overruling are actually pretty significant because the appeal judges actually stated that the judge in the case set the bar for burden of proof way too low. And basically his instructions to the jury were found to be not suitable. So not only did they quash the conviction, they actually threw the case out. These guys are not going to be retried. Now, what this basically means is we are going to see, particularly obviously in New York State, a number of further appeals, no doubt some more overturning of convictions. This will have a knock-on effect, and therefore I think we'll see less prosecutions being brought as the prosecutors realise that their chances of success have probably changed in light of this. And the output basically means that the Wall Street has actually been given not an all clear to commit insider dealing, but certainly a little bit more confidence in carrying out activities which they may have been very, very careful or reticent about under the regime prior to this case coming through. Now, the last point I'd make on this is, whilst this is US specific, obviously Wall Street, New York being one of the 3 major centres, it's going to have a knock-on effect to the approach of prosecutors in both the UK and in the Far East. And if anything, it actually widens the gap, particularly between Europe and America, in terms of what we consider to be insider dealing and not insider dealing. So there may be some kind of jurisdictional arbitrage here around what activities can be carried out in one jurisdiction, but not in another. So that needs careful eye keeping on it over the next year to see what actually does happen in New York and what the knock-on effects will be. Okay,
excellent. Again, showing that the inherent interlinking between all the financial systems within which we work. I mean, we're coming back to the UK for number 3. The enforcement powers and the UK regulators is another prediction.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the 6 years or so that I've been working for ICT, one of the key fundamentals of the role of regulation that we've taught globally across every jurisdiction is the need for the regulatory environment to encompass authorisation, standard setting, supervision and enforcement. They are the 4 sort of keystones of effective regulation. Now, last summer the Treasury in the UK produced a consultation paper looking at the potential of removing enforcement from the regulator and creating a separate body, an independent body, to carry out the enforcement action once the regulator had concluded its investigation. Now, the rationale for that is reasonably clear. If you think about the normal judicial system, the police don't actually go ahead and prosecute the crimes they investigate. There is that break between investigation and then enforcement activity. However, I think we need to be a little bit careful when it comes to industry regulators, because the people with the best knowledge to be able to carry out the enforcement activity probably are still the regulators. So it all depends on the makeup of this new enforcement body. Who are these people going to be? Is it just actually going to be the existing enforcement division split away from the regulator and given its own independence? So I can see how it could work. I can see there might be issues around it. And I think the industry needs to be a little bit careful here in terms of what it wishes for, because some of this has been driven by very senior prominent CEOs, Barclays CEO for one and HSBC for another, criticising regulators for the size of fines and enforcement and the unforeseen consequences of some of these enforcement activities. But if we end up with an enforcer and their sole activity is enforcement, then there's a good possibility that the whole focus on enforcement will actually increase and the regulatory burden may go up. So, need to keep an eye on it, see what the results of the consultation are, but I doubt the Treasury would have consulted if it wasn't the long-term aim to actually bring this about.
Well, that sounds like an interesting one. Certainly, I think some of our delegates and students in other jurisdictions can perhaps have a look at their own models and see how that works there as well.
Yep.
I mean, in terms of areas of sharp focus at the moment, point number 4 is cybercrime, which is certainly something that everyone's keeping an eye on.
Yeah, well, this was an interesting one. I definitely wanted to say something about cybercrime here. And yet, when it came to saying, well, what is the prediction for the year ahead, I was a little bit stumped. So actually, I've come up with a doom and gloom scenario, very broad. I think there will be some kind of really significant cybercrime event. Whether it's next 12 months or so, we shall see. But there's going to be something really big before we then see a huge refocusing on the issue by governments and regulators. Now, historically, and we even use the term cybercrime, we're talking about criminal organisations, but maybe the bigger threat now is shifting to anti-capitalist and, of course, terrorist organisations. There's no easier way than to inflict damage on a particular country or a particular economy than by potentially causing chaos in their financial services system. So I think we need to be really careful here. It should be a high agenda item with all regulators and governments anyway, but actually there may well be, as we know from regulation historically, there might be a big trigger event that then causes a real focus on this area in the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, I certainly think it'll be something that we'll see a lot more of. Hopefully not quite as doom and gloom as you're predicting, but you never know, fingers crossed. Then finally, I mean, coming back to sort of the governmental issues that you just mentioned, number 5 is about a potential, the UK election.
Yeah, now again, this can apply to any jurisdiction. Where you have a change of government, then it's obviously going to have a knock-on effect on the regulation of the financial services or in fact any other industry. What's interesting to note, particularly in the UK, is that in the last 39 years or so, we have changed government only 3 times. In 79, in 97, and again in 2010. And every single time, the new government radically altered the structure of regulation in the financial services industry. So therefore, if you expatiate on that, made up word. If you extrapolate, that's the word I was looking for, on that.
I like expatiate, but
it's a new word. Then what we're going to see is potentially, there is a good chance we'll have a change of government this year. If we don't, then okay, things will perhaps just continue to develop. If we do have a change of government, we have the potential issue of the fact that it's only been just over 2 years since the new regulator actually got their powers, or the new regulatory framework came into force, which is not long enough for them to really get their agenda in place and to start making any changes. So it's going to be a really strange one this year. First of all, who is going to win the election? There will be a lot of talk about financial services industry in the run-up. It's one of the 3 key areas which elections are normally fought on. The economy is actually, along with education and health, always at the top of the agenda. And the financial services industry will therefore be in the limelight again for the next few months in the UK. So important for everybody working in the area and in any jurisdiction where you have an election coming up to listen to what the politicians are saying, because it could simply be a soundbite for the media that then later on, when that party is in power, has significant consequences for the industry.
Okay, well thank you for that, Jonathan. So there's the top 5 predictions for 2015. We will come back maybe later in the year and see how we've got on. But in the meantime, if anyone out there has any predictions, top 5s or otherwise, by all means get in touch with us on our social media channels, and we'll see you again for the next one. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks, Dave.